Well, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Daryl Gay. I'm a partner in Aaron Fox, and with me today is my good buddy and co-host of the show, Jay Jamrock, who is a principal with the company I4CP, which is Institute for Corporate Productivity. For those who've participated in our programs before, typically we have a situation where Jay and I serve as co-hosts and we have invited guests. And that's going to be the plan. As many of you saw the invitation, this is an opening session with Jay doing a presentation. And then the next 6 months, we've got agendas where we're going to do today an overview of many of the issues facing the future of work and the workplace and workforce. And then from January through June of 2023, each month we're going to do a deep dive with unique particulars of these issues with guests in talking about the issues. Today's session, for those who've never had the pleasure of seeing a futures talk, and particularly Jay Jamrock and principal, are in for a treat. I've had the pleasure of seeing Jay present many times. He is both informative, intriguing, and inspiring in a lot of ways. It's likely that I will probably have time to say almost anything because Jay has so much of great value to give you guys, and it's so much we got to try to cover the next hour that I'm going to try and pipe in only once in a while just to occasionally ask a question. But on the whole, I'm expecting Jay to be able to monopolize this program and have you guys really be thrilled with him. Having said that, I'm going to turn this over to Jay.
So Daryl, you're there for cross-examination. Is that what you're saying?
Always. Keep you honest.
just to let you know, here are it's my picture. I'm co-founder and futurist of I4CP. And Daryl, you just talked about, he's a partner at his law firm. We also want to highlight Chris and Justin, who were instrumental in setting this up and getting the PowerPoints done and getting the marketing out. So we want to just give them a shout out. So those are the different pictures. This is the agenda. And so, like Daryl said, this is going to be just an overview of what I see as 4 trends and 4 next practices. I used to only do trends. And then I had one of my colleagues and a CHRO firm that I respect a lot and said, Jay, I like the way you give the trends, but you don't tell us what to do about them. And so I'm going to give some trends and some next practices. In case you don't know, I4CP's purpose is to identify and propagate out there the next practices in talent management that drive high market performance. So I'm going to cover 4 trends: the war for talent, and a next practice, the emerging people leaders, the talent imperative, which is all about skills and creating a skill database, building skills, and the need for more talent mobility in companies, and the new next practice as an internal talent marketplace, and getting culture right. In other words, I'm going to look at what the difference between toxic cultures and healthy cultures, and how do you build a healthy culture. This is all based on our research. If you don't know who I4CP is, we're a research organization. We're probably do more research in the human capital space than anybody in the world. I'm going to be showing you a lot of different things. So one of the things I want to do.
Jay, can I?
Yes, go ahead.
One thing I want to tell everybody, for those who have workplace environments where you are concerned about potentially being organized by a union or concerned, one of the reasons unions organize and successfully is because of the culture factor. So that last segment that Jay's going to cover is so important. Because every time I'm a traditional labor lawyer and I find that there's organizing drive, that culture factor becomes a key reason why unions are able to successfully tell companies you should be organized.
You're absolutely right. And the other 3 issues also become more or less important depending on what kind of culture you have inside your organization. We've done tons of research on culture, and you're absolutely right, Daryl. If you don't get culture right, nothing else matters. Whether it's your ability to stave off unions, to be highly productive, to be innovative, to be creative, to be collaborative. Cultures are everything today. So I'm going to go through a lot of different slides pretty fast, but I want to give you some definitions because I'm going to use some terms. One of the terms I'm going to use is high-performing organizations versus low-performing organizations. So in all of our studies, we build in a multivariate dependent variable around market performance. It's revenue growth, market share, profitability, customer satisfaction. High market performing companies are those that are in the top quartile of all 4 of those in the last 5 years. Low performing organization would be in the bottom quartile over the last 5 years. And we do a lot of combining of high performing versus low performing. What we're really excited about though is when we just start doing the correlation analysis, et cetera, and we really dive into the data and we look at for where would the next practice be. And that's one that's highly correlated with market performance, but only a few organizations are implementing it yet today. And then we'll do a lot of interviews of those companies who have implemented to see if it is exactly a next practice. So I'm going to use both those terms, high performing versus low performing and next practice a lot. By the way, there's a test on that at the end. So make sure you know that those definitions. I'm only kidding. Use the chat though, if you have questions. So we have people who are going to be watching the chat. So if you have questions as we go along, please use the chat and we may ask you to come off mute to actually present your question. If so, and I know Daryl will not be shy.
I think it's a Q&A on this platform.
Q&A. Okay, very good. Let's use the Q&A then. Mm-hmm. So the first trend we have, I call it the war for talent is over and talent won. And we did a whole study on this. We call it flexibility or flight. And why I say this is I have to get rid of this or else I'm going to start getting really upset. Okay, so why I say this, the war for talent is over. If you look at this slide, the red line is totally unemployed persons. Total open jobs is the green line. And you see the red line has always been above the green line until we got close to the pandemic. And then, of course, we had like an earthquake where that seismometer, what do you call them? It just went crazy and it just jumped. After that, we saw the green line absolutely cross over and be higher than the red line by a factor of 2 to 1. So there are approximately 2 openings for every unemployed person. Now this has changed a little bit since this graph was put together, but it's still there. So we had like an earthquake and it completely switched the job market, the labor market. Before, up until this time, in fact, way before 2002, employers have always had the upper hand in the labor market. This has flipped it, where employees have the upper hand on the labor market. And you can see the blue line in the bottom, which is total quits. And you see quits have been rising. And the way the Bureau of Labor Statistics look at quits is a little bit different than what you're probably experiencing. But with so many job openings, there's a lot of quits happening today. So the job market has changed, but who is leaving? And so we want to know who is really leaving in the labor market. When we saw by age, 41% cited workers between 18 and 24. By gender, 43% reported that women have the highest attrition rates. By organization level, 68% had the highest attrition rate. By tenure, 42% in 1 to 3 years of tenure. We've been looking at attrition since the late 1990s, by the way. And we look at it apples to apples and between companies with 10,000 more employees, et cetera. And if I look at the data back then and over the years, by age, most of it is between 18 and 24. It's in that first 2 years of employment. By gender, women always have had the highest attrition rates. And frontline workers have always had the highest attrition rates. And in the tenure, 1 to 3 years have the highest attrition. This is very similar to in the past. And I know Daryl's going to ask, well, how do we stop this? There are a couple things to think about. One is the leave decisions that people make, and the other is the stay decisions that people make. It needs to separate. So when you look at the leave decisions, especially in the first year, first 2 years, there are 3 important variables, and they're not exactly in this order. They can be in different order in different organizations. One is that lousy SOB boss that you got. So you leave that boss because they're driving you crazy. The other is compensation. Another company offers you a lot more compensation today, so you leave right away. And the other is a lack of development. You just feel like there's no development in the organization or your boss is not going to be there. Those are leave decisions. Stay decisions are very different. Stay decisions are one is, I have relationships in the company. I know different people in different parts of the organization. The other is I fit the company. Daryl pointed out that culture factor. I fit the culture, I fit the purpose, I fit the job that I'm having, and it relates to the purpose of the company. And the other is I will lose something if I leave the company. That, in other words, something will be lost if I leave the company. Those stay factors also relate to the community you're in. I have relations in the community. I will lose something if I leave. Like I have to pull my kids out of school, I have to sell my house, or my spouse will have to change jobs. And I have relationships in my community. So the stay decisions, the companies that understand that there's a stay decision that is made, try to move that in that first 1 to 3 years. And doing stay interviews is crucial, especially for your high performers. So I know Daryl was going to ask me, well, how do you solve that? These stay decisions, the stay interviews that you want to do around the stay decisions are very important. So what do workers want?
Before you go, before you go there,
yep.
I think it's important people to consider the following. The last two slides, both from this one, who's leaving, and the one before we had the statistical layout of people there. A lot of people are going to say, and I've heard people say, yeah, that was a hiccup. Yes, coming out of a pandemic, there were more job openings than there were people, but that's going to level out now. We're going into an inflation time period. Institutions talk about laying people. I just read about a major law firm laying off 75 lawyers. All that's going to self-correct, and this is not going to be true anymore. How do you respond to that?
As a futurist, this is an interesting time because it's really hard to predict. I think for the next 2 years, everybody, especially CEOs and corporations are really touting this recession as a way to gain the upper hand in the labor market again. And a lot of them are praying for it. I don't think it's going to happen. This is not a traditional recession type feel. We still have a tight labor market with unemployment being historical lows and the amount of jobs being created is historical highs. We do have historical high inflation, and the Fed will continue to raise interest rates for a little bit. So it's not going to be a comfortable labor market or a comfortable economy. But if we go, I don't predict that we're going to go into a traditional, quote unquote, recession. But you will hear a lot of it coming from CEOs and corporations about the possibility of laying people off, the possibility of a recession. And they'll cite it a lot just to scare people to get them back in the office. Because right now, there's a lot of hesitancy to come back in the office for a lot of different reasons I'm going to discuss in a minute.
So Jay, is there any difference?
But let me point out one more thing. If we don't have a labor shortage, that doesn't mean we're still out of the crisis. Because I'm going to talk about another crisis, and that's the skill shortage.
So two things in that. One, is there any difference between talking about skill shortage, tech companies and other companies, as it regards as leaving versus staying versus availability of jobs?
So you've heard a lot about some companies laying off tech companies laying off some of their tech people, and that is true. But in the last labor data that just came out, the economy still created 6,000 more high-tech jobs. So there's a lot of, how can I say, historical news that is going out there.
So as a lead into the skill set situation, Jay, there might be a factor where you might, the idea being per population of the country, there being 2 jobs, everybody available versus the ability of 2 jobs needing skilled people versus available talent available to do those jobs. I think we want to clarify that point, Daryl.
You're absolutely correct, Daryl. Great. Thank you for making that point, because it's absolutely correct. The people that are out there looking for jobs may not have the skills. That's why we'll talk about this a little bit when we get to the skills. And that's why companies are bending over backwards, trying all kinds of different ways to develop people with skills. We'll talk about that when we get to the skill shortage.
Okay.
So what do workers want? Well, they've been through about 3 years of having pretty much what they want. What they want today is control and flexibility over their lives. There's a little quote at the bottom, and it's not my quote. I stole it from somebody else, and I forget who I stole it from, but I read it, that young people, not young people, but all people are saying, Life is a full-time job and work is a side gig. Seeing many people, even older people, that left work during the pandemic who are not returning. That's why the labor force participation rates continue to be low, and especially low around older people. Usually come back to work after they do their early retirement, but they want control and flexibility over where they work, when they work, and how they work. Now, that doesn't mean always being working at home, as you just see from the pictures. It could be working from a lot of different places. I have one employee who's got a camper, truck with a camper, and he does his work, but he just travels the United States and does his work out of his little camper. That's fine. I mean, he's good, high producing employee, but they want control and flexibility. They don't want you to dictate. This is one quote from a CEO. It says, if anybody doesn't want to be flexible, tell me your company name and I'll be happy to recruit these employees. Now, I could have put anybody out there. In fact, I have 3 or 4 quotes from different companies who say the same damn thing. By flexibility, it doesn't always mean remote. Some people will want to come to the office every single day. That's the way they think can get promoted. That's the way they gain visibility. The proximity effect to the boss is important to them, and they want to rise in the corporate ladder. There's some who want to do their job. Just let me do my job. You're what you're paying me for. I can do it at home. I can be very productive. And it's been shown they can be very productive. But I don't need to come to the office every day. It makes no sense whatsoever. There's some who wanted to come to the office maybe 1 or 2 times a week just to get away from the house and get out of the house and meet their colleagues face to face. The big thing is hybrid work, which we call hybrid, those 3 models I just talked about, requires flexibility, not rigidity. Dictating a specific hybrid structure is never negatively correlated with all those things I have listed before. So when we build dependent variables into all of our studies, and we want to know if this independent variable is correlated with dependent variables. And so we show negative correlations when a company is rigid about the flexibility. So rigid means, well, we'll let you come to work 2 days a week. You have to be in the office 2 days a week. Pick the 2 days, but you got to be there 2 days. That's rigidity. You can be there 3 days a week. But you got to be there Tuesday and Thursday. For why? I don't know. They don't even give you a reason. The rigidity is the thing that turns off people and starts building that toxic culture. Are you listening? High performing organizations, maybe I told you, but we look at high performing organizations are 3 times more likely to consider the employee's input to the extent of deciding where work happens compared to low performing organizations. 3M has a way of work your way initiatives based on trust. Trust is huge. You're going to see this come up a lot, and wholly flexible models. Listening, and you're going to see this when I show the culture stuff, having a listening strategy where you actually listen to employees is becoming huge out there if you really want to keep employees. So our next practice has to do with letting managers be leaders. So Warren Bennis says, and that's a very bad picture of Warren, by the way, leaders are people who do the right thing. Managers are people who do things right. Traditionally in organizations, we want managers to do things right. We want consistency and predictability out of our managers. Leaders, though, although we do leadership development training for a lot of our managers, are people who do the right thing. So managers of teams, supervisors of teams have got to move beyond consistency, predictability, and doing things right to actually understanding what is the right thing to do for my team around flexibility, around work from home, around coming to the office. Intentionality around coming to the office is important for a manager to, why am I coming to the office? What is the purpose of it? And if there is a good purpose, I'll show up. By the way, some people are saying today, my commute time is part of my work time because I usually don't have to commute. Or you should pay me during my commute time or pay for my commute.
Mhm.
because I didn't have to do it before. Now you're making me do it. There's a whole lot of stuff coming out of this out of this pandemic that the new work environment in the future is going to have to deal with. We did a
Jay,
big,
before you go forward, Jay, I want to just point one thing out
yep,
that I see consistently in most institutions is they promote people to being first and second line managers because of the tenure of the employee or because of their proficiency at their jobs. But
right.
they never train or teach them how to be managers. They have no clue what it means to be managers, nor do the companies hold them accountable for the management aspect of their job. They hold them accountable for production level of the group, but not for how they manage people or evaluate their people. And that's a handicap. And when you say leaders are getting training, we're talking usually about C-suite or right below C-suite getting
Right.
training, but not the guys who actually have the day-to-day interaction with the staff.
But we did a big study on leadership development, and we looked at it at all levels of the organization, the
Mhm.
C-suite, the senior leaders, middle managers, first line supervisors, and individual contributors. If you wait to do leadership development to mid-level managers and above, it starts to have a negative correlation with leadership effectiveness. Where you got to start leadership training and leadership development and moving managers from managers to leaders is in that first line supervisor and individual contributor level. That's where you have the biggest bang for the buck when you're doing leadership development. So when we looked at what's happening here, what makes for a good leader coming through this pandemic and beyond, and we looked at what are the leadership behaviors that became more important during the pandemic. Of course, accountability, performance, productivity, all were important, but these things became more important during the pandemic if they wanted a productive team. One is well-being, create a sense of well-being, community, connection, belonging among workers, transparency, being able to communicate and be very transparent. These are for managers now, not senior leaders. An understanding, a practice of listening, active listening, and seeking to understand others' points of view and concerns, having a digital mindset. Those of you who weren't here before when we got on board, I saw in firsthand light, Daryl having a digital mindset. It's just a joke, Daryl.
I got you.
Agility, freely sharing learning and best practices across the organization, and talent development. Being a developer of talent becomes, and you're going to see this even more important in the future. So these are the next practice kind of behaviors that we're looking for. Now, what we're seeing in the press now is the conflict about, are we showing too much empathy, and should we be emphasizing more productivity than empathy? And it's contentious right now. A lot of senior leaders think that managers have too much empathy. They are too much involved in seeking other points of view and being empathetic to their situation, their family situation, etc. Remember that quote, life is a full-time job. Work is a side gig. And I don't care what age you are today, most people are buying into this concept. I just read a study that said, I am not going to work beyond what you're paying me to do. If you want me to do this extra stuff, I'm not going to do it. You're paying me to do X, Y, Z. I will do X, Y, Z. So this next practice around this whole stuff. This quote I love, and this is for all managers, all leaders, all first-time supervisors, especially senior leaders. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. I wish every senior leader would look at this quote and take it to heart. We have to learn, unlearn, and relearn if we're going to have a productive workplace going forward. That was the first trend and the first next practice. The next one is a study we did with Fortune. We called the talent imperative. And what it showed in our study is skill shortages pose the greatest potential for disruption of business. Not this labor shortage, but the skill shortage. As Daryl pointed out before, there may be two people out there for two jobs for every unemployed, but do the unemployed have the skills? Do the people looking for the job have the skills? And this is the people out there who are leading companies saying skill shortage, potential disruption of the business. It's ahead of inflation, It's bigger than supply chain interruptions. It's bigger than geopolitical instability and other factors. 71% of the respondents from large organizations, that are organizations with 1,000 or more employees, ranked it above all other factors. So even if we come out, as Daryl said, is it a little blip? Is that chart that I showed you where the unemployment, where the number of jobs were 2 times the number of unemployed, is that a blip? It could be. This is not a blip because of a lot of factors like technology, of like changing of skills to fit the new environment, the new jobs, the new ways of working. This is going to be a bigger factor. In fact, these are the top 10 jobs coming in the future by the future of jobs by the World Economic Forum. You can see almost every single one of those, except for a couple, have to do with technology. 50% of all employees will need reskilling by 2025. But only 12% of organizations perceive their reskilling efforts as effective. We are not addressing this skill shortage. And I'll tell you, overall, few believe their organizations are ready for the future. In fact, 70% believe that their organization's workforce does not currently have the skills necessary to advance the strategy over the next 1 to 3 years. Huge problem. How can you execute a strategy if you don't have the workforce that has the skills to execute the strategy? Organizations largely don't know the skills of their current employees. 53% have insufficient data around the current skills. 27%, now this is unbelievable, 25% of the respondents said that LinkedIn knows more about their workforce than their organization does. That means 25% said their organization, LinkedIn knows more about the skills of their people than their own organization does. Nor does the organization have are strong at identifying the skills that will be required in the future. 47% lack clarity around the skills that will be most important going forward, and only 16% were effective at identifying skills that will be required in the future. So as Daryl pointed out in the future slide, it's not just the labor shortage that's going to be a long time thing. It's going to be a skill shortage. So when I said the war for talent is over, talent won, really we've entered a new era. It's the war for skills. And the company that can win the war for skills, that goes beyond just identifying, recruiting, and retaining. It takes the culture. It takes looking at it differently. This is Diane Gerson, good friend of the Institute. She was the former Senior Vice President, Chief HR Officer at IBM. And she says something very profound because my PhD thesis was on strategic workforce planning. So she said, we need a real-time sense and replace capabilities or competencies for skills. And as our business moves to be more agile models and adapt new technology, in this environment, strategic workforce has been relegated to the trash bin of history. We don't have the ability. Today, it's all about understanding where your talent risk is. Based on your strategy, based on the future, where's your talent risk in your talent supply chain? That's internal and external to your company. And most companies do not understand that they have a talent supply chain, and looking at the talent risk in that talent supply chain is what's most important going forward. So you need to change a manager's mindset from scarcity of skills to sources of skills. That's the talent supply chain. And this is the talent ecosystem model that you all can look at. We have lots of case studies around companies that are looking at things differently than in the past. It's more than just build, buy, or steal. It goes way beyond that. It's change your mindset of where are the sources of skills? Where is the talent supply chain, both internally and externally? And Daryl, I'm going to ask you, and as we start talking about the talent supply chain and this, about your ideas around looking at the community, the business, and school systems to collaborate on building this talent supply chain.
So basically, what I've suggested when we've had our meetings is I see no reason why, the CHROs and the educational system should not be interacting. I think there's a real gap. I mean, that's true both in public school systems. I've had my kid in private school systems. They're just as bad. I think the school systems today are preparing kids for the jobs of the 70s and 80s.
Yep.
They just haven't modified it. And the curriculum developers for school systems need to be sitting down with CHROs and discussing how do we game plan this so when our kids come out, when they get ready to go to college, they know how to think about what they need to be studying to get a job when they come out. Otherwise, they come out of school with $250,000 debt in education and have no jobs.
I think we talked about expanding that beyond just the schools and the CHROs or CEOs, but the unions.
I agree.
Be involved in the conversation. The community leaders should be involved in the conversation. This has to be, if we're going to solve the crisis, the skill crisis in the country, and continue to be the #1 economic engine in the world, we have to do this. If the data shows that 80% of all the engineers in the world over the next few years will be developed and live in Asia, not the United States. That is a scary piece of data. We have to have good skills, and it's just not engineers. It's a lot of different skill levels.
So, Jay, on that point, there are some unions that have stepped to the plate and have developed workforce development for their members. That is something at the bargaining table should be a joint effort, not just employ, it's your job to make sure the guys are able to job. This, if the union is going to really be valuable, it should be a team effort. We're working hand in hand to make sure both the members of the union and the employees of the companies are able to be able to not only make a good salary and good wage and good benefits, but can be productive and feel like there's value in their coming to work. And that means a feeling that they're actually accomplishing something, not just showing up.
A collaborative effort, not a confrontational effort.
Exactly right.
Yeah. So one of the next practices we see around this skill shortage is many companies today are deciding to build a skill database internally and externally. Now, most of them are just focused on internally now, but some companies like 3M and some other ones like Unilever are also looking externally and see where are the skill databases externally. There are tons of platforms like Upworks and other ones that provide skills as needed. So what is the database? And so at Microsoft, Monica did a great conversation with her. And to them, it's about discoverability for us. And it entails removing the barriers to discover people and to be discovered. So I have skills that my company doesn't know about. Daryl has skills that his company does not know about. How can he be discovered? How can I be discovered? And how can you discover? To deliver on our big bets, it will be critical to us for easily discover and tap into information about the talent we already have. And I would suggest the talent outside the organization that is ready, willing, to able to work anywhere in the world and has the skills that you need. So connecting job, roles, capabilities, competencies, and skills, they're different. And so I want to put up just a little slide to illustrate the difference between a job, then so say senior project manager, then a role is the project lead, then you have a capability or a competency as project management, and then you have a skill, meeting facilitation, risk management, task tracking, etc. You can do these with everything. John Boudreau and Robin, I never can pronounce his last name, wrote a good book called Work Without Jobs. And it talks all about deconstructing jobs. And that's what you got to think of. How can we deconstruct our jobs to get down to the skills that we have inside the workplace? So how to build a skill database is all about deconstructing those jobs. When you deconstruct a job, and all jobs aren't going to disappear, by the way, just because you're deconstructing jobs. It's looking at skills and building a skill database. So even if you're in a job, you have skills in this database that other people can tap into in the organizations. So you have to identify the stakeholders. The stakeholders are providers or consumers of the skills. The stakeholders, I believe, are mostly employees who now have the ability to build their own internal brand. They're used to building a brand, an individual brand on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and all the other websites you have. You can build a brand on TikTok or whatever. Why can't I build a brand inside my company? Why can't I brand myself with my skills? So the stakeholder is the employee and the company. You identify the scope of the data, the technology you have to use, because you can't use this on a spread, do this on a spreadsheet. So you got to identify the technology use. We have a whole guidebook on this with all the technology, et cetera. Then you have to, what are the success metrics for this? Are you just going to build it and hope people come? What are success metrics? And then gathering, verifying, and maintaining the database is a crucial thing. You got to gather the data, you got to verify the skills, and then you got to maintain the skills. Then you have to identify, have a mindset and a culture changes may be needed for the company to actually utilize this. Most companies don't know how to utilize a skill database effectively. And then codify the process of identifying future needed skills. So it's just not the skills of today, but what are the future? So if I'm building an internal brand inside the company, I'm going to do it with my skills, but I also want to be developed. That's one of the reasons why people leave. They don't get development. So in my skill database show, these are the skills I would like to learn in the future. These are the different technologies I would like to learn about. I would love to be a coder. Disney has a great program called Code Rosie, where you can learn how to be a coder. And no matter where you come from, no matter what job you have. So it's all about developing skills too. So the goals and the benefits of skill database, I'm not going to go through all of this. Let me tell you, there's just tons of benefits that we saw that correlate with having a skill database. So learning and careers, the talent mobility, the career pathing, the learning and development, supporting a learning culture, employee branding, knowledge transfer. Then you have intelligence, improving automation decisions, leveraging hidden talent, increasing business agility, competitive intel, strategic and workforce planning again, maybe come back if you actually know what skills you have and what skills you may need. So that's the second one. The first one is this whole flexibility issue that people want from their companies, that control and flexibility. The second one is a looming skill shortage that companies have got to address with more intelligence going forward. The third one is, how do you develop skills? Well, one of the things we've learned in the past is every time we looked at developing skills inside of a corporation, when we mention internal talent mobility, it has the highest correlation with success on developing skills. And this quote points it out. So this is Mariana from Dow. And the thing I'm going to point out there is they want to have the 70-20-10 learning philosophy. What the 70-20-10 means is 10% of learning comes from the classroom. 20% may come from your boss or your coach. 70% comes from actually doing something. In other words, that talent mobility, where you actually can move to another part of another job, where you can learn different skills, where you can be upskilled and reskilled. While you're still in one job, you can be upskilled and reskilled in another. So it's that doing, not just sitting in a classroom, not just hearing it from your boss, but actually doing something. That's talent mobility. So the internal talent mobility, why is important? Organizations with strong internal talent mobility perform better than their competitors. In other words, market performance. They perform better in the marketplace. The best companies make mobility a requirement. Mobility reinforces retention. We know we want to retain the best and the brightest, but we need to have some way to develop people. When low performers do pursue talent mobility, it's usually reactive. What this means is that the high performing organizations actually plan for it. So if Daryl has a high performing person in his department, and it's the highest performer, and I go to Daryl and say, Daryl, I'm the HR person. I go to Daryl and say, we would like to give this person some opportunity to learn more skills and really do a little more talent mobility with this person who's a high performer. Daryl should have been planning for that ahead of time. It's not a reactive thing, because his first reaction is going to be, hell no, Jay, that's my highest performer. I'm not giving him away to somebody else in the organization. That means I'm not going to get my bonus this year if this person leaves. So it can't be reactive. It has to be planned for. So the high performing organizations are 2 times more likely to prioritize talent mobility. In other words, plan for it. So why prioritize and what are the benefits? Again, increased retention, this skills development, learning, transparency, equity, and inclusion, increased organizational agility, thinking about work differently, increased cross-functional collaboration. One of the things I'm seeing right now that's important for employees is to work for an organization and culture that is purpose-driven. And learning about the other parts of the organization and their purpose and how it all fits together with what you have in your part of the organization, in your support role, makes a big difference on how they feel about the company. So despite the benefits of talent mobility, for most companies, it's too often, it's too hard. Overall, only 32% believe that their organizations are effective at facilitating internal movement of their employees. This belief was nearly 2 times higher among those from high-performing organizations. So you can see high-performing is not a big, it's a hard thing to do, primarily because of one big obstacle, and there are other ones. Leaders too often hoard talent rather than enable talent mobility, especially their high performers. Why wouldn't you want to hoard your talent? Because they're a high performer. So 42% of managers often hoard high performing talent rather than encourage their development. 32% are effective at facilitating internal movement of employees. And here's the biggie. Only 20% of managers are recognized and rewarded for talent development, or in other words, talent movement. We don't recognize and reward people for doing that. My mantra is what gets measured gets done, what gets rewarded gets repeated. If you're not measuring managers for doing this, and if you're not rewarding or punishing people who do it or don't do it, it doesn't get done. If all I'm getting measured on is getting the widget out, the quality and quantity of widgets out the door, I'm going to do that because that's where my bonus is coming from. But if I'm also getting measured on developing talent and I'm getting rewarded for it as part of my bonus, then I'll do it. Because what gets measured gets done, what gets rewarded gets repeated, or what gets recognized gets repeated. So one of the next practices we're seeing to overcome this talent hoarding, to overcome the barriers of developing people and moving people in the organization is something called internal talent marketplaces or internal gig markets. So we all know what a gig market is. Those are people who are outside the organization who work at a gig. My father was a gig worker. He had a 6th grade education. He took any gig he could to make an income for the family. He was not the smartest person in the world, but his talent and his work ethic was phenomenal. He would take any gig he could to make jobs. That's the gig market. Uber drivers, gig workers, people that are on Upwork platforms, things like that. Those are gig workers. So you can hire them in and you can use them. Why not create an internal gig market so you can spot talent inside the organization? So at Unilever, they have a great internal gig market. We did a whole case study on them. And we need new ways of working. Much more agile and flexible organizations bring people together in different ways to make sure that knowledge and experience is much more fluid in an organization and accessible for the moment you really need it. This internal gig market and with these skill database platforms allow you to tap into talent anywhere you need it. So when we did this talent ecosystem and we looked at what are the different ones that are going to give you the most advantage in the future as far as skills go, by far and away, it was this internal talent marketplace. Over all the other sources of skills, it was the internal talent marketplace. Those who believed that their organizations currently have the skills necessary to advance their strategy over the next 1 to 2 or 3 years. Remember, they have the skills. They know they do. These are companies that believe they do. They're 17.5 times more likely to currently have an internal talent marketplace. 17.5 times more likely. But only 19% of organizations currently leverage their internal talent marketplace to access the needed skills or capabilities. So the internal talent marketplace, and I just want to put this up now, I'm not going to read it all, is an internal gig market, okay? It's important you to define what this gig or internal talent marketplace is all about. It's not about a permanent move from one position to another, or one part of the organization to another, or one country to another. One gig may require 100% of somebody's time, but lasts only 1 week. Another may require 20% of somebody's time, but lasts for 6 months. These are like projects. These are things that are working in the organization. These are places where at 3M, and I may get this wrong, so I apologize to anybody on call from 3M. They have, I think, 5 different business units. Their internal skills database knows where their skills are in all 5 of them. So if I'm in Germany and one of the business units and I have a project I'm working on, I can tap into skills in Brazil, in the United States, in Canada, from all the other different business units to work on this project. This builds people's skills. This builds their, their connectiveness, their collaboration. And it could be taken on many different forms, but it doesn't be a permanent move. So when I go to Daryl and say, I got these gig assignments, he won't be freaked out because he's not going to lose his high performer. He's just going to lose this person to work on a gig job. Now, the big problem here is, why should I do this? When my discretionary time, I want to be with my family. Remember, life is a full-time job. My work is only a side gig. Why would I put my discretionary time? This is what they call high engagement. To do this. Now, high-performing organizations are 7.5 more likely than low-performing organizations to support the use of internal talent marketplaces by reconfiguring pay systems and incentives / reward employees for project success. So they're more likely to actually pay people for doing these extra assignments, these extra projects. And then a lot of times, some companies, it's not even if the project is a success, it's just working on these different projects to gain different knowledge and different skills. That's where the next practice comes from. So Daryl and I talked a little bit about the skill thing, and it goes beyond. I just talked about internally what companies can do, but we will be discussing in future sessions during the year how to really collaborate with the school systems, with the labor unions, with the community leaders, with other people in the organization to really build a talent supply chain, to start thinking in terms of that talent supply chain, not just for you as an employer, but for society as a whole. We need it if we're going to be the #1 economy and still stay the #1 economy in the world. The last thing I'm going to talk about, the 4th one, is about culture. We wrote a whole book. Kevin Oakes is, I'm the co-founder of the company. Kevin Oakes is the other co-founder of the company. We did it in 2007. We did a big study on culture and culture transformation, culture change, et cetera. And Kevin Oakes is an excellent writer. In fact, for a CEO, he's a lot better than I am, and that kind of ticks me off. But he's a good writer, and this book is good, full of great stories of companies who build unshakable companies by looking at their culture. Because if you don't get culture right, nothing else matters. Our recent study said that 25% described their culture as healthy, only 21%. This is after coming out of the pandemic, et cetera. 26% described their culture as toxic or unhealthy. Toxic being on the other side. I would say the other ones that are in between, they would say their culture is maybe healthy, maybe unhealthy. Calling it real healthy or toxic, they won't, but it's right in the middle. But a quarter will say they're healthy, and a quarter will say they're truly toxic. In fact, toxic company cultures is the #1 reason why people are quitting work today. Toxic cultures are 10.4 times more likely to contribute to attrition than compensation. Remember, I said in the beginning that the leave decisions, one of the biggest ones is compensations. Today, we're seeing culture being one of the reasons people leaving. And if a company's culture is not purpose-driven and matches the individual's own purpose in life, when those two match,
you have a beautiful thing.
Jay, I will add into that that not only is it the reason people leaving, as we talked about earlier, it's the reason why companies are feeling, employees of companies are feeling the need to get a third party such as a union come in to help defend them. It is
Right.
also the reason why sometimes you'll find companies with toxic cultures will have a higher level number of charges of discrimination, other problems going on because of all the tension in the workplace.
Absolutely. I mean, you heard the term quiet quitting.
Mhm.
You know, why? I mean, I would be quiet quitting if I was in a toxic culture. We have a small company and have a great culture, but we are so concerned about our fast growth because we're growing at 30-40% a year that
Mhm.
we are very concerned with our culture and we do not want it to get toxic. Because you're absolutely right. All the bad things you hear about companies can be related back to the culture. And by the way, a lot of the culture it resides from yes, the cultural leader is the CEO, but the manager and how they manage their teams and the empathy they have to drive teams to be more productive and to be more collaborative, et cetera. How they go about that is key to making this happen.
And I'm gonna add one more thing, Jay, and I'm gonna let you ride because we're only about less than 10 minutes to finish up.
Yep.
It's not sufficient to create a code of conduct that sets forth a cultural theory in writing and then not implement it in the operation of the company.
It
And
can't be a plaque on the wall.
nope, not at all.
So here are the 9 signs that your culture or subculture, because there's subcultures in every culture. There's 9: toxic, cutthroat, non-inclusive, insensitive, conflict avoidant, disrespectful, bureaucratic, chaotic, complacent. These all lay at the manager's foot, not the CEO has to be the culture leader, but the person who really drives it is within their teams. So top toxic behaviors, disrespectful behaviors, the top challenge to address. Poor behavior is overlooking or disregarding what makes talent decisions. So who is promoted? Is it the person who makes the most money all the time, even though they run over people and they treat them disrespectful? That creates a toxic culture. Cultures view change as wearing them down. Employees who feel safe to express that psychological safety is important. If they don't feel it, it becomes toxic. Senior leaders do not trust employees. Remember I said that trust is huge. If senior leaders don't trust employees, why the hell do you hire them? You have to trust employees that they're going to do the right thing for the company. Employees do not trust senior leaders either. So the trust factor becomes huge if you're going to build a healthy culture. So healthy cultures define the traits are collaborative, they're employee focused, they're innovative, they're learning cultures. In other words, where we talked about skill development, et cetera. They're inclusive and they focus on quality, bringing out the best performance in people. The top practices. Board places a high priority on culture. Does your board, not just the CEO, but does the board hold the CEO accountable for the culture? Is company communication of values, do they communicate to a very high extent? Communicate, 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 communicate. And then when you think you've communicated enough, you communicate more, especially around the culture. And we say values. I keep seeing today companies that are purpose-driven talking about their values all the time. I look at Patagonia. That's a purpose-driven culture. Leaders consistently demonstrate the organization's value or the purpose. Leaders are accountable to the employees' outcomes. Remember I said that managers should be held accountable for developing talent? Exactly. When managers are held accountable for employee outcomes, we have a better organization. And that means managers and leaders addressing behavior issues as soon as you identify them. And I'm going to talk about how you identify them in a minute. So talent practices that influence culture, training senior managers and training frontline leaders, changing the hiring model. In other words, who you're hiring, it makes a big difference. The quality of hire, not just looking at the time to fill and cost to fill, but the quality of the hire. Launching internal mobility programs, that internal talent marketplace, communicating your values, your purpose. Leaders consistently demonstrating values, leaders held accountable for employee outcomes, again, shows up. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but there's a lot of ways to look at accountability.
Okay. Organizations that hold leaders accountable for the employee outcomes. In other words, to perform. The true human resource professional is the manager. It's the manager of their teams. They manage people every single day. So if you have good managers, you have less of the following. And Daryl was talking about it just a minute ago. You have less union on it, less bullying, less sexual harassment, less discrimination, lack of inclusiveness. It's just less of it. And you can do it in a separate. I'm going to move to this.
Go back to 1 second. Go back one second.
Go ahead.
Jay.
Yep.
One thing you have in this healthy culture methods I want people to pay attention to, you spend a second on the running close out, is stay interviews. Most companies do not do stay interviews, do exit interviews. They're finding out why the employee left versus what they can do to keep the employee to stay.
Yes, yes. It's called a listening strategy. And really listening to employees and having stay interview. You don't have to interview every single employee, but managers should be interviewing their high performers and really helping them stay with the company. This is Brene Brown. She says our book is the best I've seen when it comes to creating an organizational cultures that create competitive advantage, unlock performance, and rehumanize work. So we're right at the end. And so there's 18 steps. Plan, build, and maintain. When you plan, I'm just going to mention a few things. Have a listening strategy. You have to listen today more than ever before. Employees have lots of choices today in the labor market, especially if they have skills and willing to learn those skills. So you have to have, like Daryl said, that stay interview. Listening strategies, finding out what's happening. And there's lots of ways. I know companies like Amazon and Microsoft and IBM, and there's other ones, even smaller companies, who do pulse surveys every single day to get the feeling of the company today. Both when they open up their laptop, there's a short survey, 1, 2, 3 questions. When they close out at the end of the day, there's a couple questions. So finding out the pulse of the company. You have to measure and monitor your culture. And you have to figure out how to measure and monitor it. You've got to build it. That means having a communication strategy. Looking out, who are the skeptics and non-believers that are hurting or undercutting your culture? And you have to have this training of the desired behaviors you want your managers and your first line supervisors to have. And then you have to maintain. And maintain is almost everything HR does. Make the onboarding experience about relationships. Promote the best people who represent your culture. Change your performance management practices. Leverage employee affinity groups. We have seen this even with our leadership development programs. Companies that are leveraging employee affinity groups have much more success at developing leaders than anybody else. And culture, we find, is one of those areas where you can listen to your affinity groups and see what they have. Focus on talent mobility. Don't forget to listen externally. So that's a lot of information. The big takeaway is Daryl and I are going to do deep dives on all these things over the next six
Next slide, Jay.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Mhm.
Thank you. So these are monthly on Wednesday, meeting 12 and 1. So you see January 11th, these are the topics we're going to be looking at. February 1st, March 1st, April, May, and June. So we are going to be doing these all the way through June. And if the people want us to continue them, we'll continue these dialogues. Now, the big thing why Daryl and I collaborate here is, as a futurist, I look at society and the workplace. Daryl looks at it from a different angle, which is very important, is as we go into this new work environment, what are the legal implications of some of the things that we want to do or think that we should do? And how should we think differently about some of those implications as we go forward?
And in our sessions, we're going to have people who are from companies operating the day, CHROs, CEOs, who are living the day-to-day. Jay and I can be, I can say, it's nice of you to say it, Daryl. It's nice of you to say it, Jay, but you're not living it. We're going to have these people who are living it, who are going to give us perspective from their roles in their companies to really guide you guys as how to approach these issues.
And we are going to be giving you some options to make these, put these on your calendar so that you won't forget that they're coming up.
And just a little promo from me, and I apologize to everybody else, but we have a conference every year. It's probably the best conference you'll ever see in the world. It's in Scottsdale every year. It's our next practices now. It's March 27th to 30th. What makes it different is there's no consultants or no vendors. These are all senior level people in organizations who come together, 400 or 500 come together to share what's working and what's not working, the good, bad, and the ugly. These are some of the speakers. The speakers are all good, but it's the networking. I call it a big party. It's a 3-day party, but it's the networking around these parties that become so important as people get to see each other, share ideas, and talk. Because there's not a consultant there that's going to hand you the business card and say, well, I can solve that problem for you. No, these are companies sharing their ideas all together. So I just wanted to do a little promo on that.
I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and we hope to see you guys on January 11th. If you got any feedback from us about what you like or you don't like with the program, please let us know, because the goal really is to help you guys. I wish everyone a very good, healthy, and happy holidays.
Thank you, Daryl.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.